Okay, good evening, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. And before we get going here, why don't we stand and do the pledge, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I'd like to welcome you to this meeting, or this workshop, September 24th, and we're going to be talking some mental health initiatives for the district. Before we get going, I'll just go ahead and introduce the folks up here, since we're filming today. So I'll start at my far right with Ms. Lynn Town, Clerk of the Board. To my immediate right is Dr. Steve Cook, our Superintendent. To my immediate left is Tom Hearn, Vice Chair. Lisa May, Trustee, and Amber Pickford, Trustee. Miss Jen Brumley couldn't be with us tonight, so she's not here. My name is Casey Morrisrow, and I'm the Chair. Let's see. We need to approve our agenda board. Is there a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
Second.
Okay, thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Our part's done. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Cook. Here, I think you're going to start.
Yeah, good evening. We are excited is not the right word, but we're glad to bring to you the dialogue tonight in which we present some of the district's initiatives around mental health and more specifically some of the stuff we're doing on suicide prevention. And I think we've got a kind of a team approach today, and we've got some guests, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves here in just a second. But I do want to kind of set the stage for our intent tonight. And the first part of that is that anytime you're talking about mental health and wellness, you're taking on a very, very large topic. So one of the things we've done tonight is to try to narrow that scope a little bit and get a little more specific with the approach. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some things that have to do with adverse childhood experiences, or otherwise known as ACEs. It's kind of topical now, and gives us kind of some background as to what kids can bring to our classrooms when they are coming from home, and how those influence their learning. And we'll move that into what some of that trauma may look like when it gets into our classrooms and how we deal with that. And so, and then lastly, we'll present in a tier. We're going to introduce something I think for some people for the first time, maybe that we've talked about it this way. It's called the multi-tiered system of support with regards to mental wellness for our students and how we approach providing services on a tiered intervention level. And Frank Meyer is going to talk a little bit about that. And then Trina and Nicole are going to go through some of the strategies that we have. And I think Kate's plugging in there also when we do the stuff on adverse childhood experiences. But it's really difficult. I'll tell you right now, it's really difficult to capture all the things that you'd want to talk about in an hour and a half. And so one of the things I'd ask is let's please ask your questions as we go. Let's dialogue this. This isn't meant to be a presentation, a one-way presentation. It's meant to be more interactive. So I'd ask that for your guys' involvement with that. And secondly, almost everything we're talking about today is upstream care, preventative kinds of care, and things that we're investing our time and energy in for our students. And we're going to allude to and talk about partnerships that we would have with groups outside of the district that are helping enhance and provide a more wraparound support. But that's also an area that we feel like we can do more with as time goes, and we build better partnerships and relationships across the district. And lastly, we're going to send you away with some documents of things that we've got so that when people ask and want to know what are we doing, that you've at least got reference points to talk through. We're doing a lot, and not only is it a lot, but it's actually quite strategic in the means in which it's being delivered. Mental health doesn't mean suicide prevention, and suicide prevention doesn't mean mental health, but they are interrelated, one and the same. And so you're going to hear that from us today, and I think we're excited to have this opportunity to present to you. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Kate and let her start.
Good evening, trustees. In a minute, we'll invite Keith Orchard, who is here. We'll invite him to share with you a little bit about the kinds of work that we're doing in terms of mental health and wellness for our children who are coming to us in classrooms, and they're coming from a life of maybe chronic stress or trauma. But he'll talk quite a bit about adverse childhood experiences, but we wanted to share with you that we don't want to assume that everybody fully understands. I think the ACEs quiz and the ACEs information has sort of been bandied around quite a bit, but we're not assuming that everybody is truly really familiar with it. And 2 years ago, our administrative team took this brief little 10-question ACEs quiz, because that's one of the things that helps us get at understanding our own childhood. And they took this quiz, and it's a very private quiz. So what we did is if you have a piece of paper, and there are 10 questions that I'll ask you, and we're kind of inviting everybody who has a piece of paper to maybe answer these 10 questions for themselves. And basically it's yes or no. It's that simple. And the questions themselves are somewhat difficult. So if you have a piece of paper, these 10 questions, and then you'll have a chance to really sort of get at your own ACEs score. So you won't see the questions on the screen. You'll just hear me ask them, okay? Okay, so question number 1, by the way, this is nothing that we're sharing with anybody, just like our administrators didn't share their scores with anyone. So this is all about while you were growing up during your first 18 years of life. Question number 1 says, did a parent or another adult in your household often swear at you, insult, put you down, humiliate you, or even act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt? So that's question number 1, and you just jot down yes or no. Question number 2. Did a parent or another adult in the household often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you or at your siblings? Or even hit you so hard that maybe it left marks or you felt injured? That's question number 2. Question number 3. Did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you or touch your body in a sexual way? Number 4. Did you often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought that you were important or special? Or did you often feel that your family didn't look out for each other or feel close to each other or support each other? Question number 5. Did you often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, or you had to wear dirty clothes, or had no one to protect you? Or did you feel that maybe your parents drank too much, or didn't take care of you, or maybe didn't take you to the doctor if you needed it? Did you often feel that way? Question number 6. Were your parents ever separated or divorced? Question number 7. Was your mother or stepmother often pushed or grabbed or slapped or had something thrown at her? Or was your stepmother or mother kicked, bitten, hit with a fist? Question number 8. Did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker or an alcoholic, or maybe used street drugs? Question 9. Was a household member depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member ever attempt suicide? And the last question, question 10. Did a household member go to prison? So those 10 questions are probably the most difficult part of our evening together, is just hearing those questions and answering them for ourselves. And I'll turn it over to Keith, who will have the privilege of telling us what those questions mean.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. And thank you, Kate, for leading us off. And so my name's Keith Orchard. I am a social worker. I'm a recovering teacher. And so I work, and now I get to do kind of both because I'm the trainer for child welfare in North Idaho. And so with that, I get to teach pretty much every day, which is wonderful. And about 7 years ago, in child welfare, we read a book. It was called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, written by Bruce Perry, who's a national expert about trauma and childhood stress. And we realized as a group, we did a study, and we did multiple studies with Bruce Perry, and we realized that in child welfare, we'd been kind of missing some stuff. We've been, with certain kids, we were doing things that maybe weren't the best for them, and we realized, we go, oh, we got a lot to learn. And that was the beginning of us, as we call it, getting on the trauma train. So we all started about 7 years ago, and we've been chugging along and getting more education, more information, and 7 years later, we've come a long way. And we still got a ways to go, but we've done quite a bit. And so this year, what we've decided to do, last year, I did 12 sessions with Kate and the leadership team in Coeur d'Alene, an hour and a half each time. So they got, like 14 hours of discussions about trauma, about ACEs, and all sorts of other things. And they decided, well, I think we need the teachers to do that. And so that's what we're doing this year, is doing this presentation times 4. We're doing it with every elementary school teacher in the district. And they will all get 4 hour-and-a-half presentations. And so that's what we've been doing. So hopefully the whole district, because we realize how many people we need to help these kids. And so the whole district hopefully will be on board and partnering with us in child welfare and partnering with other people in the community. And so as we go, let's just jump into a couple of steps. And please stop me if you have questions as we go through. And so as you just did, we did the ACE study right there. And strangely enough, the ACE study has come about, it kind of came apart by accident. There were 2 doctors in San Diego in the 80s who were doing an obesity study. So they had recruited hundreds of people to lose weight. And these were college-educated, middle class, mostly white people that had jobs in insurance and that happened to be obese. And they were losing weight and going through a study, and many of them were dropping out. Or they would gain the weight back afterwards. And I thought, what is going on? What are we doing wrong here? And so they had the idea to go and interview these people. And what they found out was that within that group, they found a remarkable amount of abuse and neglect, and particularly sexual abuse that had occurred in their lives, in their childhoods. And they thought, could that be a pattern? I mean, that is crazy. And these are people we would normally think are very high-functioning, middle-class kind of folks. They go, if they're experiencing all these kind of things, what about everybody else? So in the 90s, they expanded their study and got tens of thousands of people, I can't remember the exact number, and asked them these 10 questions. And as we can see, we could ask a lot different kind of questions, right? They didn't ask about a parent's death, and they asked about intimate partner violence, but it was really just about a mother or a stepmother being abused, but we know violence can go both directions. So we might change that study done today, and actually people have. But originally they did those 10, and what they found, here's what they found, which started this whole thing, this ACE study, and moving along. And so those were the 10 categories, right? There were 3 questions about abuse, and there are 2 questions about neglect, 2 kinds of neglect, and 5 just household dysfunction, like living with someone with mental illness, or living with someone who's incarcerated, or a divorce, living with someone who has a substance abuse problem, and so on. And so of those 10, they decided, well, if you have them, what are the outcomes for that? And as you can imagine, if you have a lot of those, if you have 8 of those, your life was probably very different than if you had 1 of those. And does it make an impact on you? And if it does, how much of an impact? And so they looked and they said, well, if you have more of those, it's like dose specific. So the more of those you have, the more likely you are to have some of these behaviors. The more likely you are in adulthood to have drug use and alcoholism, to smoke and be obese. And the more likely you are to have all sorts of physical health problems. Depression, so mental health problems like depression and suicide. Physical health like heart disease, lung disease, COPD, stroke, cancer. And they said, wow, what's the relationship? So that's one of those things that's pretty interesting. Because not only is the relationship really strong, but then why is it? We could kind of get, if you grow up in an environment like that, how it would affect your mental health, but also your physical health to that degree. Well, let's take a look. So here's what they found when they put those. So here's a first chart, and the ACE scores at the bottom. So if you have 0, and this is about depression. So the red columns are for women, the yellow ones are for men. And if you have a score of 0 ACE score, your chance of a woman having depression sometime in your life is a little less than 20, like 18%. And for men, it's down there about 10% or so. And then you can see if one of those things happen, you're on average, your likelihood goes up, and then 2 and 3 and then 4. And if you track that, if you followed that graph to 5, 6, 7 through 10, it would carry on with a similar slope, right? So the more you have, the more likely it are that you will have some sort of depression in adulthood. Makes sense, really, when you think about it. So that's for depression, and you can see the shape of that chart. And then they did it for lung disease, COPD. And so obviously a very different kind of chart, but it's same shape, right? With different percentages there. Lower percentages, but same shape. Alcoholism, lower percentages again, same shape. Smoking, same shape. Suicide attempts. And pretty much everything else. And this one, we'll go back to that one for that. Everything on that slide right there, liver disease, sexually transmitted disease, the chance of having 50 or more sexual partners, that's what they measure, 50. 50 or more sexual partners, same shape. Depression, pulmonary disease, every single one of those things they measured had the same shape of a graph. And they thought, that is unbelievable. Like this is the thing. And as doctors, these two doctors said, we've never seen anything with so much correlation between some sort of event and then the future prognosis. And they said, this is a public health crisis. People need to know this. And so for the last 20 years, they've been sharing that information around the country, letting people know that this matters. It matters a great deal. And so what we're doing there is we're talking to folks, and it makes sense. People go, okay, I get that. And I kind of always got it, kind of, but I guess I really didn't know how that worked or that it was to this degree. And so that's what we've been talking about or working on in the, with the school teachers. And so what we're doing, so now I'll give you a really short presentation of what we're doing for the teachers, right? So they kind of know. And so what we're doing is talking about, if we want to know that, we're going to talk about how all that trauma, why do we have mental health or physical problems? Well, let's talk about how trauma affects the brain. And what we do is we talk about the 4 Bs, the brain, the body, behaviors, and beliefs, right? We're going to do the brain today. And so when we talk about the brain, we make it really simple. We have 3 parts of the brain: the brain stem, your limbic system, which is, I always point back here when I teach it, right? Your limbic system right in there, your emotional part of the brain, where the amygdala is. And then the cortex, which is the whole top of the brain, and then the prefrontal cortex right there, yeah? And so we know, you know, that the brain stem does those things. It is about the survival and the stuff, and it's mostly wired when you're born. I mean, that's what happens in utero right there. That part of the brain has to be wired so you can survive outside in the world. And it continues to be wired for the first few months and years. The limbic system comes next. That gets wired for the first few years of life and continues, but it does lots of wiring early in life. And then the prefrontal cortex is what teachers are reaching for. That's what we're working at. That's what we're trying to touch all the time. And that is being wired. And you all know, it's a workshop. I'll ask questions, yeah? So how long does it take before the prefrontal cortex is fully wired, do they say now? Yeah, 24, 25 is what I heard. 30? Is that new? I don't know. Probably. There's still hope for us under 30 then, right? Yeah, so anybody under 25? Nope, we're all done? All right, we're all done. Good, congratulations everybody. You're fully wired and functioning adults. And so there we go. We talk about those 3 parts. And then what we're teaching is like kind of the upstairs brain or the downstairs brain. That's just code word for saying, which part of the brain are you in? How are you feeling? Really, it's just code word for what's going on with you right now, so that we can have quick, easy ways to communicate and share when I'm getting upset. Like when I'm upset, I'm in my downstairs brain, and that's my fight or flight and my worried place, right? And when I'm thinking and calm and ready to learn, I can be in my upstairs brain. So it'd be kind of nice to know that if your student is in an upstairs brain or downstairs brain, if they're in the upstairs brain, we go, we teach, we move, we act, we do what we need to do. And if they're in the downstairs brain, we slow down and stop solving problems and figure out how to get them regulated, how to get them calm, how to help them feel safe until they're back in their upstairs brain, and then we can move them along again, because learning doesn't happen when you're in your downstairs brain. So this is the model we're teaching mostly, and how many people maybe know this, the hand model of the brain, right? Yeah, from Dan Siegel, Dr. Siegel, right? Okay, so everyone put up your hand. We'll do it together. And so we're going to do that. So here we have our spinal cord, and the palm of our hand right there, the base, that is the brain stem. And then your thumb is the amygdala, and that folds in. So we got the amygdala right there. And then the whole top of the hand is your cortex. And you fold it over like that, and you have a little model of the brain, right? So if you look, it's literally your brain stem. There's your little ear hole right there. Right there. Hold it there. There you go. And kids love it when you call it the ear hole. They think that's funny, and they remember it, right? They go, there's my brain. And so when you are in your calm and in your thinking brain, you are here. I'm in my upstairs brain or thinking brain. And then when I get upset, I flip my lid, and I'm in my emotional brain. And so that language actually works for little kids, and it works for high schoolers. The flip your lid or upstairs brain, downstairs brain, or where you're at. Some schools really like to make it more, they use colors. I'm in my green, I'm in my yellow, and I'm in red. And so that I actually like that because it gives 3 kind of things, not just 2. So you can really tell them, like, I'm okay, but I'm in my yellow, so before I freak out, I can let you know that and then be able to take care of myself. Yeah? Others use a number system, kind of almost fist to 5. If I'm in the green, I'm fist. And if I'm 1, I'm still doing okay. When I'm 2, I'm starting to get in yellow. And 3 and 4, I'm barely holding it together. And then 5, right? 5 would be I flipped my lid. And so that's another way that people can communicate. Teachers or students can communicate very quickly about how they're feeling and what's going on. And that's kind of nice. I don't have to say a lot. I can just give you a 4, and I go, oh, Kate's a 4. Okay, Kate, go ahead. Go do your thing. Yeah, there you go. Go get your water and or your coffee or whatever you get to help calm yourself down. And so the reason why this all matters is because we know how the brain grows as educators. We know that, like the example we give is, or what's something that you can do completely automatically, like a skill you have learned completely without thinking about it? Yeah, brush your teeth. That's pretty easy. How about something a little more complicated? Drive a car. There you go. Yeah. Yeah, it's true. And my son, currently, he's supposed to go get his driver's license in a week. Or he's scheduled the test anyway. And if you haven't taught anyone to drive recently, it can be kind of scary at times. You know, and he's a confident driver and he's pretty capable, but the first few times or the first few months we were out there, he would do things that dumbfounded me, right? He had to really focus, and even just making a smooth turn where you slow at the right time and then accelerate through the turn, that was a hard skill that I didn't realize because I had mastered that skill so long ago, I'd forgotten how hard it was to do, right? But the very first time he did it, he didn't have any kind of connection in his brain. He didn't know how to do it, but he did it and he learned, and so his brain kind of wired that way. And then they go, oh, you're gonna do that again, and you're gonna do it again, and it starts to wire it really, really well. And then it wires it when you do something so often, it will wire it and make it subconscious, where you can do it automatically without thinking. It can skip this whole part of the brain, right? Same thing with like physical activities like throwing a ball. Like we could probably play catch and have a conversation and do math all at the same time. And I don't have to think about my elbow and the direction of my wrist and the release. All that just happens subconsciously, right? It can skip all of this. So that's good. That's how the brain works. It wants to be super efficient. But in that picture up there on the right, what happens if I'm really scared when I'm 5 years old and my parents are fighting and I don't want to leave the room? And then my fight or flight part, the amygdala, lights up and says, that's okay, I'll keep you safe. That's what I'm here for. And I'll wire that, and that's okay, that's what I'm here for. But then the next night they come in and now they've been drinking and now things are getting smashed and screaming, and then the police show up And they go, oh, this is really scary. I know, you're going to use me. I'll wire you again. And you're going to use me a lot. If you're going to use me every day or all the time, I'm going to get wired really, really well. So well that I am going to be really, really sensitive and ready to react at a moment's notice. Just like throwing a ball. I can throw a ball and you go, oh, got it. Right? Or when I'm driving, I can be thinking about something, oh, I'll stomp on the brake or make a move immediately without having to think about it. So these kids, they have wiring in their brain, which is very different than wiring in kids who grow up in households without a lot of ACE scores. And so what happens is if this part of the brain is wired really well, first let's talk about fight or flight. Right, and I always love this one, even though I have no idea what he's doing. But it's an appropriate picture for what we're doing. So when we talk about fight or flight, you know this. What are a number of things that go up in the body when you're in fight or flight? Heart rate goes up, blood pressure. Adrenaline. Yeah, the adrenaline is what makes the heart rate and blood pressure go up. And the breathing goes up, and muscle tone goes up. All those things are going up, right? In order to be ready to go and be just aggressive or be able to survive in those moments, yeah? And then there's a few things that go down when you're fight or flight. What turns off or goes down? Yeah, decision making. Boom. My decision making, right? Because when I'm scared, the bear walks in front of me on the trail, and the last thing I need to do is go, is that a brown bear or a black bear? I don't know. See, I'm there, and I need to be in survival mode, right? So my thinking goes off, my decision making goes off. Yeah. Yeah, things that I don't need. My digestion either just turns off or just leaves me completely, so I don't have to worry about it, right? Yeah. And any kind of like the endocrine system or the like your what's the word for? No, you all know. Other systems. There we go. Other systems that we don't need turn off, and your peripheral vision also turns off, right? If you get really, really scared, you go into total tunnel vision. In kids, that happens all the time. They actually start to lose their peripheral vision because they lose it so often. They're in fight or flight so often that this part of their brains kind of turns off more permanently, and that's an issue. So, what they found when I mentioned Bruce Perry before, and he did this thing where he was a runner and he's seeing this kid who'd been through some really terrible things, and the kid goes, "What's that?" Because he's wearing a heart rate monitor. He goes, "Oh, here, try it on, kid. What's a normal heart rate for a 12-year-old child?" 60 to 100, well, okay, 60 or, 60 for someone who's probably in really great shape. 60 would be pretty low. 80 would be maybe, somewhere around 70 to 80, somewhere in there, right? Depending on lots of factors. This boy, he handed him the heart rate monitor. His heart rate was 110. And he was just sitting there calmly in an office. Can you imagine? So what's keeping his heart rate at 110? Stress, adrenaline, and cortisol in his system all day, every day. Hypersensitive to stress, hyper attuned to stress, all day, every day, kind of waiting and looking for a threat that's around him. And so he's constantly on alert. So when they have that, he's got a high resting heart rate. He looks behaviorally explosive, right? That's the kid who's standing in line and someone cuts in front of him and he goes, yeah, and he punches him in the back of the head. And people go, oh, he went from 0 to 60 like that. And we'd say, no, he doesn't. He lives at 40. He's never at 0. So it doesn't take him much to get to 60. So he looks dysregulated. Of course, when you got a bunch of adrenaline in you, do you have good memory? Can you focus? Can you go through a 6-step math problem or read a paragraph and write a little response to it when you got a bunch of adrenaline in your system? That'd be pretty hard to do. So what do we label these kids as? Like, what are diagnoses they have? They look like they're ADHD, huh? And they look like they're ODD, and conduct disorder, and anger management, right? These kids are fighting, and they're aggressive, and they're flipping tables, and they're yelling and swearing and those kind of things, right? So we have some of those kids at our school who might be pretty hypervigilant to any kind of stress and any kind of threat, make them go like this, and then they behave like that at home and in our schools. But we have a second type of response, of course. That's what we call dissociative response. And dissociation is this brilliant thing that if you are in trauma or in a really scary situation and you can't fight or you can't run, then you can dissociate and run internally. Yeah? It's pretty great. It's just a brilliant little thing. And all of us dissociate all the time. Going back to driving, anybody ever driven home and not really remembered how you got there? That's because you're dissociating. Or read a paragraph and then can't remember any word that you read. It's because you are not present, you are off thinking about something else. It is perfectly normal. Most people dissociate like 50% of their time, and which is okay, but we can dissociate and pop right back when something interesting comes up, someone tells something that's new. But people who are dissociating, they have a different chemical in their body. They have their natural opioids. Their brain produces opioids like pain medicine, right? Like Oxycontin or even heroin or morphine, right? They're gonna get a natural opioid in their system, which is gonna lower their heart rate. And that's really good, because if you were in a car accident and you were bleeding badly, you would not want adrenaline in your system because you would bleed out. You would want opioids in your system to slow your body down, and that's gonna help save you. It can also help save you or slow you down or remove you from pain and suffering that you're going through if you're being abused. And you think like sexual abuse particularly. You can't run, you can't hide. Something bad's happening to me, I can disappear and not feel that pain. And so if you have opioids in your body, anybody ever had surgery and been on pain meds? Yeah? Yeah? How's your memory and your focus? It's a little tough, right? It's a little tough with those. Your brain doesn't quite work right. Might be a slower processor. And then, of course, you have pain. Of course, these are these kids that are hypervigilant to dissociation with a little bit of threat, and they go and they dissociate. These kids are the ones that tend to be cutters later on. Because when I get a cut, I go, that hurts. Ow. And it hurts. When they get a cut, their brains release, because they're sensitive to it, lots of opioids. And that allows them that is their way to cope with a lot of stress that's going on with them. Yeah? So we have, and then what do we label these kids at, or what are their diagnoses? Yeah, certainly depressed. Oh, the bullets mixed up. Bipolar, perhaps. ADD, not the hyperactive, but the attention deficit type, because they can't focus and they don't have memory, and they're always daydreaming. Oh, they're totally ADD. So what we know, this is why this is important, because if you have someone who's really ADD, and we've all met one of those, who are on a pill and not on the pill, and they are night and day, right? That is a child who has a chemical problem, a chemical issue in the brain, and taking a pill will change the chemistry of the brain, and it will help with ADD. But these kids, taking one of those pills doesn't really help them, because it's not a chemistry problem, it is a wiring problem in the brain. And if you have a wiring problem, the medication won't really fix it. You can take some medication to help cope with some symptoms for a little while in order to go to treatment and in order to get other kind of things, but really the medication is not going to be the solution for them. So then we have kids, some of our kids in our school might be hypervigilant, some might be dissociative, some might be both. They can switch back and forth. And then of course we talk about, well, is there proof to that? Like we can look at brains and we can see the one on the right is very different. It's got different coloration, and it's obviously much smaller. But just having a smaller brain or something, you can't tell a whole lot from that. And that's the way we've thought about brains for centuries, because that's all we can look at, right, through autopsies and so on. But now we can take pictures of brains. It might actually help if we turn one of those lights off a little bit so we can see this. But you know, here's the classic picture with the brain on the left is the one. I don't know. What do y'all think? Can see the slides better anyway. Oh, okay. I think that's good. We can see the slide now. So you can see there's two brains. One on the left is a normal functioning brain and the same age, and then the one on the right is same age child. And you can see they're really different, huh? The one on the right has, so the parts that are orange and yellow are the parts that are lit up, the ones that are connecting and firing with electricity, right? So what are some of those differences? Well, they're obvious, aren't they, right? Yeah, the front part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex on the brain on the right, is much less wired, much less developed than the one on the left. And so if these kids are both 8, the one on let's say 8 years old, the one on the left is a normally wired 8-year-old brain. How old would you say the brain on the right is then? I mean, it's possible to know, yeah, but it's obviously much younger, right? That's the brain of a child who has far fewer experiences. It has not been connected nearly as much. So that child's coming in, even though they're developed, they're 8 years old, their brains are not 8 years old in those cases. They have parts of their brains that are wired really well, and when that part, when I'm in fight or flight, the rest of it, when I'm in there, the rest of this is not wiring. I'm not learning, I'm not exploring, I'm not doing other things, and that's going to really change how I develop. And because, you know, the front of the brain has all those things in it. And those are the things we're teaching. Delayed gratification. But why would I delay my gratification if I can't even really see the future in front of me? I mean, why would I go through frustration? And initiative means I need to have a goal. I need to have a future that I can imagine. And so all of these things would be really hard to have if that part of the brain's not wired very well, right? And then, of course, so then we look at really, so is that really true? Are they functionally, developmentally younger? So we know about child development. How old do you think the child is that drew that picture? Yeah, preschool, 4-ish, yeah. This was actually an 8-year-old boy drew this picture, and he was one that had severe neglect for those first 3 years of life. And then, how old do you think this child is? You're all trying to think back into school and say, at what age do the hands become pitchforks? What is that? I can't remember. Yeah, 5, 6, maybe a little older. Turns out this is a 14-year-old who drew this. So you can see what way we talk about is that these kids, we have different ages. We have chronological ages. We have cognitive ages, which schools are really good at figuring out the cognitive age of our kids, right? She reads at 6th grade level, doing math at 5th grade level. You're good at that. And then we have a developmental age. And so some of these kids developmentally are much younger. And we knew that, but this is really showing us that and saying, so then when they have behaviors, instead of labeling the behaviors as being spoiled or lazy, or what else do we call those kids that are acting out? Defiant, rude, drama queen. Someone yelled out the other day, PETA, pain in the A, right? Right. So we got our different labels that we put for these kids, right? And really, when we're talking about going, what if she is just acting normally for how her brain's developed, and she's just coping exactly as she's been taught with stress? This is how she's learned how to cope with stress. So then when we do that, we talk about all that and how it affects the brain, and then the second session is about how it affects the body and sensory processing, and then we go into, well, then what do we do about that? If we know that, how do we structure our schools and our classrooms to be a little bit more supportive for those kids and to help them, because we know what grows the brain is patterned, repetitive, consistent responses with a caregiving adult. And so we can grow the brain of those kids through lots of repetition, lots and lots of repetition, and other parts of the brain prune away when they're not being used anymore, right? Think high school Spanish, anyone? Yeah? So if you don't use it, it's going to go away. So what we hope for our kids is that we get them to feel calm and safe enough in school. This part of the brain goes, hey, I'm pretty safe. I don't need to be used anymore. Hey, I'm feeling pretty good. It starts to prune away, and this part of the brain starts to grow more and more and more. And just like academics, if they're behind, behaviorally and developmentally, we'll try and work and catch them up to be at grade level. Questions?
To me, that some of that wiring of severe trauma is not very reversible. You know, I used to work in abuse and neglect too, and in mental health. You have a kid who's severely mistreated at a young age. You know, that's, I mean, you look at, like for instance, the diagnosis of, they used to call it multiple personality, that kind of dissociative response is hardwired at a young age and really hard to bring that back, even if the kid is, or a young adult is no longer being mistreated. You know, I guess what I'm saying is I think that you're right. I think we can do a lot to help with the wiring of some of these kids, but some of the wiring is so damaged from abuse or neglect that it's hard to bring that back, at least from my experience.
So we know that obviously the earlier we catch it, the better off, which is why 0 to 3 is the most important time. Did I turn this off? No, I'm still on? Okay. So 0 to 3 being critical for that reason, because the brain is far more plastic and malleable at the earlier ages. There is research to show that some events make permanent changes in the brain. And so then, of course, as Bruce Perry puts it, it's kind of like there's a certain age in which if you don't learn a second language, you will never speak it fully and completely. It's like age 6 or something. Anybody know that? I say it all the time. Maybe I should look it up. Yeah. So there comes a certain age when your brain doesn't really, won't really learn a language the same way it would when you were 0 to 5, right, or 0 to 6. And so what he says is you will always, and when you're doing relationships, that can be damaged. You'll always do relationships with a limp, is one way they put it, right? Or you'll always have an accent in how you interact with people or how you respond to the world. But that doesn't mean, and because it's kind of permanent, right? And there's some accents you just can't get rid of. But that doesn't mean you still can't be functional. And so in the end, what we try and do is really work and do the best we can, even for those that have some really, really hardwired and tough trauma situations. Yes? Just talk real loud.
On the flip side of that, there is a lot of new research happening about the plasticity of the brain and new neural pathways that can be developed through the relationship. And I think it's important to shed light on that in the classrooms when we're giving help to
That's right.
students who have had difficult traumatic backgrounds. That's not the be-all end-all of who they are and who they become.
Yeah. That's right. I don't know where the line is when that's permanent and that's not, that's fixable, that's not. So we really do try and send the message like it's fixable to a degree, right? But the brain can keep growing and we can have an impact because that keeps us in the game and that gives us hope, and that's really what it's about, right?
What does
Yeah.
this? Sorry, go ahead. I just wonder what this looks like in the classroom in the elementary school level, with all that the teachers have going on. I don't know if you've volunteered in an elementary school classroom before, but it's quite the task. I wonder what that looks like for the teacher to really take the time with these children, because that's what they need is the support and time. And when you got a million things going on and then you have a kid who clearly has trauma, who knows what they came from that morning, I wonder what that looks like and where we can begin to give our teachers the tools that they need.
I think part of the work that Keith is doing is helping our teachers understand. For instance, he does an activity where they label, and then we talk about, what if it's not that? What if it's, what if it's not ADHD? What if it's not oppositionally defiant? What if it's a kid who doesn't feel safe? So helping us reshape, rethink the way we look at kids makes a huge difference. Second thing is we're working really hard to try to understand how to develop classrooms where the kids are feeling felt safety. So if I become aware of a child who's in chronic stress and is constantly looking like, what's that sound right outside the door? What's going on in the hallway? If I know that as a teacher, I can do a lot to avoid putting that child in a place where he or she feels unsafe. Like something I might say, why don't you stand up and read that, Mike? I wouldn't say that to that child. There's so many ways we're discovering that we're creating the trigger points for kids by creating that place where they don't feel safe that normally a child should be able to handle. So we're learning how to rethink how we approach our kids, I agree with you, Tamara. I mean, it's one thing to have a child or two in your classroom where they've experienced chronic stress. It's another thing to have a half a dozen, right? So it's a lot of work. We're finding ways to come together and learn together as adults, but there's a lot that we're rethinking in terms of their health and safety.
I also wonder at the middle school, high school level, for me, I'm thinking through this. Sometimes I think an elective class, I don't know what type of class, what that would look like, but sometimes these kids, maybe they're not quite sure. I go back to, I'm a breast cancer survivor, and after I've had all this stuff going on that I thought, oh my gosh, what's going on? Why do I feel this way? And then I went in, I had all these tears for the poor nurses, and they were like, oh, this is normal. And I thought, this is normal? Nobody told me this was normal and that I was going to be feeling this way. And if I had only known that that was normal, I wouldn't have beat myself up so much. about feeling the way I did, and then they start talking about, well, your body just went through this and you were dealing with this, and just hearing that alone, it was like, oh my gosh. So I think about these kids that maybe don't know if they were educated on this, or even the Asa score, if they even had a clue, because sometimes they live in this life and to them it is normal, and so they're not quite sure what to do. But I just think that, gosh, what a light bulb, or what would that look like if they had this knowledge of this is what's going on, and oh my gosh, if I just could do this or reach out to someone. I don't know what that would look like, but middle school elective or high school elective, or I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking out here and just thinking from experience that sometimes when you hear stuff and you're aware of it, it's like, oh, okay, you know, and I'm not alone, and other people aren't alone. And so then, as you know, you can then, you know, I always tell people, if you know anyone going through this, ask them how they're doing after treatment, or after, you know, what's happened in their life, because sometimes they don't know that that's normal and your brain has gone through what it's gone through, if that makes any sense.
So that makes a lot of sense, and I think there's to connect with what Amy's just said earlier, there's new research out now. Dan Siegel's book, his entire premise is that the brain is quite elastic, and the plasticity doesn't go away even when you're ancient, that you still have the capacity to grow and develop. In some cases, just knowing that other kids are going through stuff like this can help just give a child their own awareness of their circumstances. That's the, you know, to pull that back to your first question too, is what does this look like for our teachers? I mean, just think, you know, we have either at least an idea of our own number in this room that we were doing in that quiz that Kate was giving to us. And imagine if you had 24 kids in a classroom, and the cumulative scores of those 24 kids were 5, and what it's like to teach that group of 24 kids. And then do it again and imagine what if the cumulative score was 125 for those 25 kids. What does the difference look like for those two teachers in those environments, and how do you provide that kind of support? I'm not saying, I'm obviously oversimplifying and saying that you can quantify it into a simple number, but the idea is no two classrooms are the same, and that teachers have to have support and training and an understanding of what they're looking for, and just being aware of what our behaviors might be can help, number one, with not putting kids in that fight or flight state, and number two, if we can ever get to the point where we can talk them through it, maybe they start to learn and understand, then we create that dynamic on its own too.
I had a question just on this. Do we use a screening tool to screen kids for ACEs, or what does that look like in our district?
Well, maybe this is a good time to move into what we are doing, and then maybe something, and we will talk about some things that we're working on, and then I think we can answer some of those, Lisa, for you. So Frank, do you want to?
Let's see a question over here.
Of all that, what you find out, then you have to act on what you find out. But a lot of places have used the ACEs tool in a classroom setting in which students can respond anonymously, and then the classroom picture comes up and they see how many people have 4s, how many have 8s. So they can see, not knowing who it was, but what the classroom experience is, and the teacher can see that as well. But, you know, they feel it's not just me type of thing. And what puts together a 4 for one person is a 4 to somebody else as far as their lived experiences. But ACEs as a screening tool can be very dangerous just because of the implications with that. When you actually identify who that is, then you need counseling.
You're about dangerous because of lack of resources.
It is lack of resources, absolutely,
So that
because
might be
you
a
have to intervene.
consideration that we look at that issue.
So,
You know.
But there are other tools that are out there to do a better, more complete social assessment of what the risk factors are for these kids as well.
And I guess that was my question: is if we know that this, these students are out there, making sure that we can create, if we have control over classrooms and resources. So I'll be curious to hear what tools you would recommend for screening students that are in crisis or in need.
So, trustees, Superintendent Cook, this part of the presentation is we're going to look at the RTI model, or as MTSS. Those terms are sometimes used interchangeably. When we look at the response to intervention model, we're looking at how the initiatives for mental health and suicide prevention fall and which tier they fall under. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and explain the model and how it kind of pertains to everything. So we start with tier 1, and in tier 1 we're looking at all students. This are students, and what you have here, you have culturally responsive environments, you have PBIS, positive behavior supports, and those are available for any students who may need them. Then we move on to tier 2, and in tier 2 we're looking more at risk students. And you're looking at intensified classroom and small group interventions that are being used. You're looking at an example of that could be behavior contracts for specific students. You can also be looking at small group social skills groups that are being utilized at the school as well. Then we move on to tier 3, and with tier 3 we're looking at our high risk students. And with our high risk students we're looking at individual interventions. We're looking at students who maybe have an IEP. Do they have a functional, an FBA, functional behavior assessment, in order to develop a behavior intervention plan? You're looking at cognitive behavioral therapy or counseling for these students. You're also trying to find wraparound services for these students as well. So those are our high-risk students. Now, as we move on, we're going to kind of show you where all of our programs and our initiatives fall and which tier they are utilized at.
Frank, are we seeing, it seems like, I guess, we're seeing kind of that the pyramid doesn't look like that anymore, right? It's those shapes are getting different.
Yeah, they are. So
and we're finding more people in tier 3 than we saw before.
yeah, so these they're not meant to be looked at as separates.
Right.
It's more of an overlap. So just for in terms of the presentation here, so you have, it should be one triangle with pieces on top of it. So just because one student falls in tier 1 and moves to tier 2 doesn't mean they don't get any tier 1 services. It's all included in there. But the triangle has changed a lot, and it changes almost every year. So there's something added, taken away. It's a work in progress. It's something that grows as long as new initiatives come along, new programs come along. It's always changing. Yeah. Oh, I see.
Yeah, it's not, narrowing down.
Yeah. Like you should upside down, you mean?
Hopefully not quite upside down, but
More
But yes,
rectangular,
yeah.
maybe. Yeah. So, what we'll take a look at is all of our programs and initiatives and where they fall under the tiers. So, when in terms of mental health, for tier 1, we have how do you say that again? OVAS, Green Dot, TBRI, Second Step, and we have our tip line from the app. Yeah. So TBRI is a trust-based relational interventions, and what that is, it's strategies and that teachers can use or that anybody can use. It's used not just in schools; it's used with any adult who maybe fosters a child who comes from a traumatic background, and it touches all the bases of empowerment. So it's addressing their physical needs. It's making sure that they are connecting with them, their attachment needs. It's making sure it's teaching them how discipline. So it's doing that correction piece as well. And it's really a way for somebody to take a look at the whole child and their needs as one.
we're kind of doing a little tag team, and so Nicole will too also come up here and share some things. So in previous board meetings, we shared with you this document, and this is a document that we also shared when we met earlier this summer at Panhandle Health with a lot of our community partners. And we found that the document wasn't really user-friendly. It's a great internal document. So what may help you as we go through these symbols and the tier system is if you refer to this document here. The suicide prevention piece is on the front. So what'll help you with, as we go through these, are page 2 and page 3 on the mental health programs. And so they go into more detail. We just didn't want to sit here and go into detail to everything. Would be here several hours. But basically highlight what we do at each level. So we picked the logos for people that are visual. So I'll start with the S. The S there is second step. And what second step is a curriculum that our counselors deliver at the middle school level. Kate, I'm not sure if we're there yet at elementary. I think we're considering that. Last year when we did the ASCA training, which is the Association of School Counseling model, second step is a curriculum where counselors go in and teach social, emotional, behavioral health items to students. So instead of going into detail, Nicole's passing out a document that goes through all the different units that those counselors will do. And they teach it whole group in the classroom. Green Dot is a bystander intervention program that we have at the high school level. It's basically a social piece where they are teaching students to be able to intervene when they see something happening at their school that's not healthy. It can be dating violence, but it's also any type of interpersonal violence. So what it teaches students is how to be a bystander, how to intervene as a bystander. So you can distract when there's a situation that's not healthy. You can distract it and stop it from happening. You can delegate it, and that would mean you would go to a trusted adult, or if you had someone else that would intervene, or you can directly intervene yourself. And so that's at the high school level. Olveus is our anti-bullying curriculum that we've had for many, many years. It is taught at the middle level during our advisory program. And then the tip line is new. And so Scott, I don't know, do you want to come say something about the tip line? It's very new. I think it's like a couple weeks old.
We touched on this at the last board meeting when I was presenting on the new mobile app, but that tool is definitely being discovered and used. I think we've received about 12 to 14 tips. Not everyone is completely taking it seriously. We're receiving some compliments. We're receiving a variety of feedback, but importantly, we have received 2 or 3 important tips about student behavior or concerning conduct. And as soon as we receive those, we're on it, the school's on it. There's an immediate response, and then we're tracking the mitigation for each and every tip that we receive as well. So we'll see how it goes throughout the rest of the fall, and we may need to readjust the framework for that tip line.
I would add to that it's not just adults too, that kids are actually doing some of the tipping.
Correct.
I'd like to point out that all of these are what we talk about as upstream programs, preventative. For example, the Olveus and the Green Dot, that is preventative to bullying and to violence in the schools. But we do have some programs where we are reacting and mitigating some of those. For example, we do keep track of our bullying incidents, and we also keep track of some other, high-risk incidents. But same thing with the tip line. It's something that's to be proactive. If we can catch something before it becomes a big deal, then we can intervene. So that's Tier 1. And with Tier 1, most students should be okay with Tier 1. It should be the support that they need for social and emotional behavior. behavioral well-being.
Trina, can I interject one thing?
Yes.
I think it would be wise for us to just requalify the structure of the triangle, of the tiered triangle, and instead of thinking of that's the students, think of where we are focusing our energy when it comes to that. So, for example, we focus our energy in tier 1 so that all students are subject to it. We focus our energy in tier 2 that's more targeted. And then tier 3 is more intensive. So rather than thinking about putting a kid in a box, think about the intensity level of the supports that we're providing at each of those levels. I think that might help just a little.
Trina, I had a question. So for the Tier 1 services, how are we educating students about the services that are being offered? How do they know about tip line, for instance? How do they know about, is there through counselors or?
Well, Olveus is actually part of the curriculum with advisory, and so it's actually really direct. Every student gets it, and they know it's part of the curriculum. They may not know it's Olveus, but they do know that one lesson they're learning how to make goals. The next lesson they're talking about healthy relationships. Green Dot actually has a campaign, and they basically each school does it a little bit differently. At Coeur d'Alene High School, they have a Spark Club. It's a group of students. It's very similar to Sources of Strength, where they have an advisor and they have students that go out there and they have a campaign and they provide information and they do training. And so that one is pretty explicit, and you'll see Green Dot signs and things like that. Second step, again, students may not know about it, but we do have a plan where counselors are pushing in, and so they have a schedule when they go in different times during the year. There's about 35 lessons, and it's for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade where the counselors go in. So I think a lot of times a student may not say, hey, I'm doing, I'm doing second step, or I'm doing Olveus. It's just something that's kind of embedded in what we're teaching them. So, for example, at Woodland, when they have their advisory on Monday, it's part of their advisory, and it's how we are as Woodland students and how we're expected to behave and interact and react to each other.
I think it would be nice for parents, especially, having a student transfer from charter to Coeur d'Alene. I didn't know about any of these services, and at orientation night, and when you have parents there, which is, not very often that you have parents sitting down in one room, to hear about some of these services that are pertinent to our high schoolers would be really helpful, even if it's a table at schedule night when you're waiting to get your schedules. Maybe whether it's tip line or Green Dot or whatever it is, somebody sitting there and passing that information and getting, making sure that parents are aware and students are aware would be helpful. At least
I would agree, because we do quite a bit of things. We have a lot that we offer, but sometimes we really don't share that with parents, and I think it would be helpful. Any other questions? So Tier 2 are really some extra layer of supports that we offer for students if they need it. We contract with Safe Passage at both high schools, and Safe Passage helps us, well, it's actually at the middle school too, but they help us with our healthy relationship curriculum. So during the health classes, they come and do presentations at the middle school level and at the high school level. They also provide an advocate on campus. They are usually in the counseling office, so if a student has an issue where they need some support, they can go visit with that private advocate. We've also had some parents come in and visit with the advocates. It's all confidential, so it's there available for anyone who needs it. Also, with the last 3 years, we've been working with the secondary counselors to get them trained in the ASCA model. And the ASCA model, it's very interesting. It's very similar to what we have up here. It's a 3-tiered model where counselors go through and deliver some curriculum in the classroom. And so that's the second step curriculum at the middle school level. The high school level, they are still working on what type of curriculum they would like to administer. But Tier 2 interventions for our counselors would be small groups. So if they have several students that are struggling with a certain issue, sometimes they will do small groups with those students. Sometimes they'll counsel students one-on-one. Nicole, do you want to come talk about? Frank's going to do this one. Okay, Tier 3.
So Tier 3 is for our most at-risk students. This year, we have the Idaho Youth Ranch. We have contracted with them this year at Venture High School to provide a counselor and provide services for students twice a week.
the main students on that campus are the students in our therapeutic support classes, but they are also there available for any student on the campus as well. Our student threat assessment team, it's basically if there's a threat, there's a team that kind of comes together. It's interdisciplinary team, comes together, assesses the situation, assesses the threat, determines whether it needs to go up to the higher level to determine the threat. And so we have that in place as well. With Heritage Health, we're currently working with some, we're trying to create a RFP to get counseling from them as well. And also we have Idaho Department of Health and Welfare. We're working with the North Idaho Traumatic NITC Trauma Collaborative, North Idaho Trauma Collaborative, where it's interagencies all working together to service students in different schools.
I just wanted to add too, with our student threat assessments, a lot of times people see that as a reaction. And really when we do student threat assessments, we're trying to catch concerning behavior early and try to look at where that student is on that continuum, and then try to come up with a plan to where we can stop the student from being on that negative path and get them on a more positive path. So again, a lot of these things that we're talking about are proactive, and so you may hear some things or think of some things that we're doing and wonder why they're not up here, but sometimes it's because they're more of a reaction versus the upstream.
So we've been talking about mental health and mental health programming as an umbrella, and now we're going to switch to specifically discuss suicide prevention programming, which is a piece of our overall mental health for our students. We're going to do the same Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 approach, and the tip line is here again as well because it could be utilized to prevent a student suicide if we had someone sharing information with us. And we want to key in on that as a piece of our overall picture. But programming wise, I'm going to talk about Cope to Thrive, which I think everyone here was probably part of that. A few years ago, Cope to Thrive was approved as an elective health course at the district. We have utilized it or offered it to students. Last year was the first year that we did that. We were able to offer Cope to Thrive as an elective course at Venture, and I think we had about 30 students participate in that. We have continued those types of conversations, and we'll be offering that in Lake City High School and Coeur d'Alene High School in the future. We also provided Cope to Thrive learning to our students in therapeutic support classrooms, a little bit in the elementary setting and fully in the middle school setting. So Cope to Thrive is a curriculum that can be used for suicide prevention, but also, interestingly, for obesity prevention. It is an evidence-based program, so we know that we will expect to see results, positive results for our students. And so we have placed it on the suicide prevention programming Tier 1, but it could go along with the overall mental health programming as well. It is a cognitive behavioral therapy approach in that the curriculum was written that way and we are able to implement it. It's designed to help children and teens and young adults. So it's a 7 to 12-year-old program, it's a 12 to 18-year-old program, and it's also a program available for college students. Helping them to deal with stress, anxiety, and depression, showing students how to develop skills that will stop negative thoughts and start thinking positively and behaving in a more positive way as well. So that looks like brief, easy to follow sessions for students. They have a workbook, they complete skill building activities. They're able to pull that workbook out again in the future because they've practiced these activities, and when they're feeling anxiety or stress or depression, they have a toolkit now that they can pull out and utilize. The message through all of this is hope for change, that my brain is not stuck in this negative pathway, but I have the power to change to positive thought processes, and that both depression and anxiety are treatable. Sources of strength. Does anybody have questions about Cope to Thrive?
I had a question. It says that it was expanded this year to CHS in Lake City. No.
The conversations we're having about that. So I think for spring semester, and we were talking at CHS, yes, to be offered as an elective, so students would be able to select it.
Do you think it'll be an elective that we have to go out and recruit students for, or
I think to some degree any elective probably.
Yeah, so that's what I
would
worry. I
have to
mean,
do that.
if we offer it, I hope students take it.
And truthfully, I think that this material on Cope to Thrive would be good for every student, not just those students who self-select it, and not just those students with high Asa scores. This is good stuff for me and you too. So I think we'll probably have a few students who start taking it, and my hope is to offer it to a lot of students in the
I
district.
think a plan in place on how we're going to get students, to take it, because it is a great course, and I'd like to see
Mhm.
it utilized. It would be great.
And so why would we not be doing this at both high schools?
I think there is a plan. I'm sorry that I said that. Our plan is both schools, and when we were meeting, it was a scheduling.
And it will be offered at both schools. Part of the difficulty is it's not a long course. So traditionally, for students to earn a credit, it has to be 60 hours of instruction. And so at Venture, it was really easy for them to do because they used it in their advisory curriculum. So what Coeur d'Alene High School and Lake City are trying to do is figure out how they can make it accessible to students and still get the credit. Coeur d'Alene High School right now is looking at a possible 0-hour course, just because with their schedule it's really difficult for students. They don't have as many options as Lake City, and so we don't want students to not take it because they can't fit it in their schedule. So we're trying to work on that and have it available second semester, and then Lake City's kind of working through the same thing. How do we make it available to students so it's an option, it's there, and we're not competing against other electives.
I have to say, the 0-hour course for something like Cope to Thrive, when we know sleep goes hand in hand with mental wellness, makes me a little uncomfortable.
And 0 hour doesn't mean it necessarily has to happen before the school day. So we were talking, a lot of times students that struggle one of the barriers is transportation. And so we were talking, is this something that we could do at lunch once a week? And then they have the activities that they do on their own and follow up with the counselor. So we're trying to find creative ways to do it. But yes, early morning probably is not a good idea, 6:30 for teenagers.
Is that, I think when this first came to Venture, it was maybe a grant through Kootenai Health or a partnership with Kootenai Health. Is that right, or am I confusing something?
Oh,
Oh.
okay. We did end up
Was,
using.
but we never got the grant. Yeah. Okay.
We did receive an Excel grant to purchase the books last year.
Okay. Thank you. Nancy, go ahead.
We haven't talked about it yet, but I think if there's interest and there's need, we definitely would consider it. We're considering now that you spoke. Yeah.
So for sources of, I'd like to remove these. Oh, no, that didn't work.
Yes,
Right here. Okay. So for sources of strength, which actually is, could be tier 1 or tier 2. I wanted to show you the pie because I think that the 8 sources of strength is very powerful. And as you're looking at those different areas that we're trying to, with sources of strength, teach students to pull from and recognize where they are strong and where they could use more support and how they can compensate in one area if they're stronger, say in family support and positive friends, and less in generosity, how sources of strength will teach students to pull from different categories. Sources of Strength is calling itself a mental health wellness project, using peer social networks to change unhealthy norms and culture to ultimately prevent suicide, bullying, violence, and substance abuse. When we were talking about Cope to Thrive, we were talking about an individual model for preventing suicide. Sources of Strength is a societal model, so it's a way that we can try and capture a community and change a culture within our community, and change the way that we interact with and understand other people. So Sources of Strength came from three root understandings and why this program was created. Adult training alone was unlikely to significantly increase detection and response to suicidal youth. We started this evening with Dr. Cook acknowledging that this is a very complex topic, and that we would not be able to find one magic answer. And Sources of Strength is trying to acknowledge that and move forward. Suicidal peers were the least likely to seek adult help. Suicidal peers maybe not wouldn't trust adults, and so trying to change that with healthy adult mentors in Sources of Strength. And then also acknowledging that developmentally adolescents seek help through their peer friendships. So again, giving students another resource there in their peers, but also equipping their peers to adequately handle what we're talking about. These are big conversations. So the idea of Sources of Strength is to increase student connectedness to adults and to school engagement. Sources of Strength is also evidence-based. It's part of SAMHSA and the National Registry of Evidence-Based Programs. So we would expect to see a change in our students' outcomes. The students who have participated in this program in the past have increased perceptions of adult support and are able to increase the number of trusted adults that they're able to name. So one of the pieces that we have heard from some of our community members is that we know about students with high Asa scores, and like, is it Keith? Like Keith was saying, that this stuff makes sense. We kind of go, oh yeah, we know, okay, I get that. That's for students who come from hard places and difficult places. And when we're talking about suicide prevention, we know that ACEs scores can be impactful there, but we also need to pay attention to and look for those students that don't have high ACEs scores. High performing individuals, student athletes, and LGBTQ students in particular have needs that may not show up in ACEs scores because we all have different backgrounds. And I think Sources of Strength is one of the ways that we can try to capture those students too in our safety net in a wellness model. Moving to the tier 2, but like we were talking about with Sources of Strength, identifying it first as a tier 1, it does move into tier 2 because we teach our peers, our students, how to interact with each other and to help and get help where help is needed. QPR is another program that we have utilized in the past in this school district, and it's been part of our curriculum for a while, and we began community trainings last year. Actually, when at the same time that we were doing the Cope to Thrive, bringing that back out. So QPR is another individual model, but is a gatekeeper model. So if you're familiar with CPR, QPR is trying to be that for mental health. The Q stands for question, the P stands for persuade, and the R stands for refer. It's an hour and a half about for community training. It's for a layperson. And it empowers individuals to ask the question and to seek or help that person seek follow-up. So suicide has a stigma, a social stigma with it, and a taboo topic. But we know that if we ask people straight out, they will give us the answer. And we can help those people to seek help. QPR is an empowerment programming so that when someone leaves, they hopefully don't feel scared to ask if someone has a plan to kill themselves. So QPR has been utilized in our school district. Last spring and through the summer, we trained hundreds of community members, including students and staff and faculty. And we are now continuing that plan to get all of our staff and faculty trained at our secondary schools and our students this school year. Yes, thank you. So what we did in the spring was partner with SPAN, Suicide Prevention Action Network, and Panhandle Health, and Kootenai Health is also part of that partnership, to offer our buildings and our locations, and then we advertise through social media these events. So we will continue those partnerships with SPAN and Kootenai Health, probably in a very similar way, so that community members can come and get training. So in Tier 3, we're talking about actual intervention with students. I left off the screening piece. So what we have not had in our school district in the past was a screening tool. And along with, like Gina was mentioning, screening tools comes responsibility and planning on how that's to be implemented and who is to be screened. So we are having those conversations with our interdisciplinary committee, and we're doing building trainings right now to educate, the school nurses are doing building trainings to educate our staff on red flags, who to be on the lookout for, and what to do with that information. And so a quick resource is call the student, call the school nurse, or call the counselor and let them know that you're concerned about somebody, and we can help. And we will be able to, during this school year, put a more formalized process in place for who's being screened and how they're being referred. That'll be with our community partners that we were talking about earlier. But in our Tier 3, we have an existing relationship with Kootenai Behavioral Health, in that for those families who are willing to share information, we do coordinate care. So when students are released from Kootenai Behavioral Health, we are not sharing a full medical file. We are just being informed that the student has been discharged. And so the school nurse is able to follow up with that student and hopefully help them to transition back into the school setting. And that may include team meetings at the school, it may include medications, it may include follow-ups or checkups.
What conversations are having kind of in this area? To me, this is, I think as a community, one of the areas that we're lacking the most. That, you know, at least the students that I see that come before the board for disciplinary reasons and those sorts of things, you know, a lot of them just can't get into mental health. You know, it's months and months and months. We've seen it, you know, recently with, you know, that's very difficult. So I just wonder how we can kind of leverage our partnerships to maybe make that path a little easier. We know someone who's, you know, they're coming before the board, they're before the principals. They need immediate help.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to have them wait 90 days for an insurance approval or to get in because the doctor's busy, it's concerning. Those are lost 90 days for those students. And, you know, that's not the Coeur d'Alene School District's issue to solve. I certainly don't think that. But I think that's a big issue in our community and probably lots of communities.
We are excited in that Region 1 Children's Mental Health is able to expand their programming, and they have, I believe, just completed their planning process and are now moving into implementation phase for the Youth Empowerment Program, or Youth Empowerment Services. And that may open some doors for some of our students who have not been able to get in to get services, and that may include screening. And in the RFP that was mentioned earlier too, with Heritage Health, we are trying to work with our community partners to see what can be done to change that kind of, how do you get into the system and how do you get services?
I'd just like to add, this is not a local conversation. This is the conversation that's happening all over the country right now. There's a heightened awareness that we can do better and provide more support. And just the question, I think Gina said it nicely, is that now once you know, what are you going to do about it? That's the question that everybody is talking about, and it isn't a school district issue. It's not one entity's issue. It's an entire community's issue. But the conversation is different. 10 years ago, these kind of conversations weren't happening in public. And if you tie in from where we started talking about just having teachers be aware of what kids might be going through, and then if it does start to be a struggle, what are their options that teachers could then, call a principal or call a counselor, call a school nurse or anybody, just so that we can start building those connections. And the more we talk about this, the more it's going to be partnerships across the community. And I think that's part of the answer is not easy. And this trying to take this massive conversation about mental wellness and break it down to specific pathways. Every student's path is different, and so that's part of why we tried to narrow it into kind of this approach. And I think that I wish we could give a really clean answer to really specific questions, but we're not ready there yet. I think that society is working on that as well.
I mean, to me, I think one of the things that seems like it's key, and Trustee May touched on this earlier, but it's just the communication piece of this and the awareness of, what services are available. I think when we met with the community health partners back in the early summer or late May, whenever that was, I think Dr. Olson used cohesiveness was his big word, right? He said it 800 times, but just all knowing what we're doing and talking the same language and using the same terms. So there's some commonality there as we seek help for our students. I think that'll be an important piece of communicating probably not only to our students and our family, but also to our staff as they're trying to make referrals and help their students that, it can't be complicated. It's got to be easy, right? Or it's never going to happen. It's going to be the three faces kind of a thing, or the whatever, the signs for shelter in place and all those sorts of things. It's got to be one pager to help people so they understand where they can go and what they can do.
I just have a couple of comments and also just a question, I guess. I do agree with Casey and Lisa that we do need to be very intentional about publicizing this. I think the community has been looking for that, whether it's at those parent meetings or whether it's in the media or however we do it. I think we need to be very clear about that, because I've had gotten a lot of inquiries about that. What are you doing? I know you've gotten the same things. I'm just telling you from my perspective. I also like to see as much as possible that that things that are electives not necessarily be electives. In other words, when I look at some of these services we have, and people are, they can choose to be in some of these classes, and I know that some of this stuff is if you look at your handout here, some of it's based on it's individual prevention issues, but I still think as much as we can, whether it's through health classes, whether it's through assemblies, wherever it is, we need to reach as many kids as, and I get nervous sometimes when we have a service, it's a really good service, but you have to elect to get into it, If it's truly a good prevention program, I would like to see us have that as broad as possible. And I guess the other thing I think is more a question of, one more comment. This whole issue of screening devices, I understand the caution of that. On the other hand, I'm uncomfortable about us not asking the question. So, we need to ask the question, and we need to have resources in place to deal with these kids. There's no question about that. So that leads me to my last comment, which is really more of a question: is do we have a vision? What would be the ideal mental health prevention and intervention program if money was not an issue? Do we have what would we like our schools to look like if we were really meeting the mental health needs of our kids. And I know we have other needs that are meet too, but really meeting the mental health needs, do we have a kind of a vision of that? And then if we have a vision, then we start, how do we get there? Financially? I mean, do we have to prioritize things on our budget? Or is it issues to go to the legislature about? But, I guess we need to have a vision like this is, this would be the best we could do in a public school system to really meet the mental health needs of our kids. Knowing we're educational in this place, we're not a mental health agency, but certainly our kids, as well pointed out by the people that spoke, are coming into the schools with all kinds of mental health issues. And it seems to be larger, as Dr. Cook said, it's across the country, it's not just here. But I'd like to have a vision, like this is what we want, then how are we gonna get there? How are we gonna, and how much of this needs to be laid out to the community, in terms of, and what does that, then on practical terms, what does that mean? Does that mean, does that mean changing our budget priorities? Does it mean an additional line item on a levy? Does it mean a very specific targeting to the legislature about certain needs of ours? You see what I'm saying? I just would like to see us, I don't know if you get my point I'm trying to make, but you get the vision and then you figure out how you're gonna get there. And I'm not sure we have a clear vision. And that's not pointing fingers at anybody. I think it's just a reality. We've been seeing this problem, filling in, putting this program, filling this problem. We're doing good things. I mean, I like all this stuff, the sources of strength and the cope to thrive and the QPR and all that stuff. I'm not critical of any of it. I'm just saying that I think we can do more. And I guess it's my bias. I worked in mental health for many years. People know that. I just think we need to ask that question, come up with a vision.
And I can answer some of the questions. On the screening tool piece, part of implementing sources of strength is one of the first things we need to do is have a screening tool and have a process in place on where to refer students. So that's one of those initial phases. As far as communicating with parents, I agree that's something that we are working on. One of our first attempts was to revise, the document. And so we would love to have your feedback. Scott Maben and Victoria Michaels went through and took that one document that we had that was just a grid and tried to put it in something that's a little more user-friendly. For example, on the suicide prevention piece, we really highlighted the 3 programs we would like to expand, included the web links, and then what we're continuing in new programs. And then with mental health, we tried to separate, between curriculum and what are services and what are other programs. So any feedback that you have as a board, because this, I think, is a document that we would like to share with the public as well with our parents. But we'd encourage you to look at this and provide us some feedback so we can do a better job at that.
Trina, I just have a general question or general feedback, I guess. I think all of this is fantastic, first of all, and I appreciate all the hard work you guys have done. The one piece that comes out to me that's missing, and it's kind of glaringly missing as I'm looking at this and listening, is have we asked our parents, what do they need? Is this document reflect parent community input? Because I think our parents and our community, while they'll think all of this is great, they may bring to light something that we're missing and we're not thinking about. And so if we have an opportunity to reach out to our community and our parents and say, how can we assist you in this process? How can we assist you with mental health issues, with your student, with your teen? What is it? And I think this would feel more complete if I knew we had done that piece yet. I know this isn't complete yet, so maybe we're planning that down the road, but I really want to hear from our parents, and maybe it's a survey that we're sending out or a community forum, but it's been a difficult year for Coeur d'Alene, and I think they need to weigh in on this.
And I would agree, and I think that fits in with what Tom Hearn talked about as, us establishing as a district what our goals are. I don't know, Dr. Cook, if you want to talk about the next steps with our strategic direction and continuous planning,
Yeah,
but that may address both those issues or questions.
I think part of what we're talking about is actively engaging. It isn't necessarily the 5 board members that need to set it or the superintendent and staff in the district, but this community needs to say what they want when it comes to producing well-rounded, mentally healthy and well students. And so what does that look like? And if it includes things that we would need to do differently or add or take out, we need that feedback. And I think we would be very willing to start to engage the community in a conversation with answering some of those questions and starting to get feedback and starting to give us some data on what this community wants. I think this is a large conversation, and I think everybody has a right to put in on to put in their input and to develop something that comes of it with regards to what we feel like we're doing. I think this is a really great capture of where things are currently, but I couldn't agree more. I think that we can take this further. I think there's going to be additional resources that are going to be necessary, or refocusing of resources at the very least when we learn when we get that input back. But I think that's a conversation that we need to have, not just in this room with 30 people. I think we need to do it in the community and get that feedback as soon as we can.
I think it's feedback, yeah, that we're verging on waiting too long to reach out to our community, in my opinion, and from what I'm hearing from community members and parents. And I would like to see us reaching out soon. And, you know, this is great, but I want to hear from our community, and I want to hear what last year was like for them and what their teens felt when they experienced suicide in our community. It's a piece that we owe it to them, and I'd like to see it get scheduled.
I think knowing this community, I think there's probably connections we could, and that kind of reach out to the community. I think that when we think about the feedback we get from the community, I know that there's a potential there's a potential of tying in with the faith community here, the church community. They could be, because I'm saying that because there's a lot of people in this community that attend churches, and maybe there we could find some way to help. We could partner with them on certain issues. I think I could say more there, but I think that's something. There's lots of ways we can connect with the community better over some of these issues, and I think that the church communities could be of help too.
I'm thankful for this tonight. I think this is a start, and I appreciate all the hard work that went into putting on this workshop. I agree with Tom that we can't be afraid of the screening, the tools for screening. I think of probably, sadly, the many kids that are just waiting to be asked that question to feel safe to give their answer. We don't want to hear it, of course, because we want to believe that it doesn't exist out there, what's going on, but it does, and we definitely need to have a plan to follow when they respond to the questions that are asked. I also love that in the sources of strength, the pie chart. I think how awesome that would be to be implemented elementary school on up, that people just have that visual of the pie chart with the 8 sources of strength, constant from elementary school on up to high school, that they're thinking about that, who is my mentor, who is a friend that I could confide in. I can't think of all that, where's my family support? Do I have family support? So they're thinking of that from a young age all the way up, that they already have, something that they can not go from here to there, that it just gives them something to think about and a plan. And I just think the more visual that is, I think that's easy right there to incorporate in our elementary classes on up, especially in our health class in 7th grade and again at the high school. But I don't see why this couldn't just be, something. And you don't have to spend a whole lot of time about, talking about those 8 things, but just making kids aware that, oh, look what I have, or I do have this person, so that they have it on their mind. But thank you again for this. Appreciate it, and I think we're on the right path.
Okay, I'll just kind of echo that. I'm really appreciative of what you've done here. I'm super excited about the Sources of Strength program. I think it's going to be maybe the most important thing we've done in our district in a long time. I hope we can engage our community in that, and Tom touched on the church folks, the spiritual folks that are interested. I look at groups like Boys and Girls Club and Junior Tackle, and all these groups that have a lot of interaction with our students, and sometimes they're the ones giving them, they're their support system. So I hope we can engage those folks and they know what we're doing and they can be part of the training as it's open to the community. So thank you for putting this together, and thank you all. Is there any other questions?
No,
comments?
I just wanted to thank our community members who are here tonight to be part of this conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, I thank you also. My questions were not meant to be a criticism. They really weren't. Just to spark further discussion and direction. That's all I'm saying. But thank you very much. I appreciate the staff that showed up and the community members that showed up.
And I'd like to publicly thank Keith Orchard for coming in and volunteering his time and helping share some of the work that he's doing and doing very well with our staff and schools. And we are very grateful for that partnership. Thank you, Keith.
Okay, I think we all got our thank yous in, so we'll go ahead and adjourn. All right, have a good night.